Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Media Day is in the books, training camp is officially underway, and a marquee signing is adding to the rotation. It's been a very busy 48 hours or so for your Houston Rockets, and well, that's what we're going to be discussing today here at the Lager Line, your home for podcast analysis of all things Rockets basketball. As always, this show is served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing, and with support from our friends over at Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team. I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and a contributor to Sports Talk 790. You can follow me on Twitter or X at Ben Dubose, and you can follow our co-host and producer, Paolo Alves, at Paolo Alves NBA. Paolo, let's jump right in. Even though camp just started, I feel like we've got plenty to discuss on this Wednesday morning for you, correct?
Yeah, it's kind of weird that we waited for Media Day to be the big news event, and then the morning after Media Day, we got, it's a minimum signing, right? It's not that big of a deal, but I think for the Rockets, it's a pretty spot on one with Reggie Bullock, because we were all wondering. I mean, the Damian Lillard trade just went down, then the Drew Holiday trade went down afterwards, and there were some pieces that the Trailblazers were left with that everybody was kind of hoping or theorizing whether they trade them away or not. The biggest one of them being Malcolm Brogdon for the Rockets, because, we were rumored to be looking for someone to replace what KPJ was supposed to do. And, I don't know if the Reggie Bullock signing puts an end to that or not. We haven't really gotten reports as far as that goes. But in my personal opinion, I think it should, unless the price is just crazy low, unless the price is like 2 second-round picks, and 2 second-round picks this year doesn't. In that case, I would probably still do it. But just because we were hoping, going into the season, KPJ is obviously no longer a basketball player, but the theory behind it was if we could, pigeonhole him into a role where he's taking advantage of his shooting, he's having less offensive responsibility on the ball, so he can focus more on his defense. It was more turning what was, supposed to be a shot-creating guard into more of an off-ball 3-and-D wing on a different role where he shares the floor with Amen Thompson. Well, if that was the goal, then Reggie Bullock fits that to a T, because that's what he's going to do coming in. He's a sharpshooter. It's not like APJ, who has, a couple of years or a year and a half shooting really well from three. No, Reggie Bullock's been doing it for his entire career. And so he fits perfectly what we wanted KPJ to become. And while, I tweeted about it and someone replied to me saying, "Oh, I can't believe we're hyping up Reggie Bullock or a buyout signing." I mean, yeah, it's not game changing, but as far as for the amount of money the Rockets are spending on this, which I assume is going to be the minimum, even though there were some avenues to making of his contract something they did with Jock Landale, and overpaying him for this year in exchange for 2 years of team control in case they wanted to use him as a human TPE. Regardless of that part of it, he addresses the biggest need this team's going to have, especially without KPJ. The Rockets by losing KPJ lost their best shooter, and they just regained what is now likely to be the best shooter on the team. Fred VanVleet could have a good year and be a better shooter. Jalen Green could have a better shooting year than him, but based off what we saw last year, Reggie Bullock would be the best shooter on this team, especially because we obviously got rid of Usman Garuba, who was our best shooter last year. And listen, that was a joke. I kind of said it in a way too serious of a tone, so I just want to outline
Fair
that.
enough.
But yeah, more important of all, you couldn't have picked a better solution for the problem this late into free agency, because technically the season hasn't started yet. It's still free agency. I would expect him to play minutes in the rotation. I would actually expect him to play more than Jason Tate, for example, who I would consider to be the 10th man in the rotation right now. He may even play more than Jock Landale, just because his skill set is something that we need so much. And usually, he's not a superstar, but that quality of players isn't available this late on the free agency cycle. And when they are, they don't sign with a team like the Rockets, especially if it's just for the minimum, which is, what any team in the league can offer for him. And besides the on-court impact, which is, I think, he'll be, the shooting guard off the bench to provide some spacing, especially with Amen Thompson, is really important. The biggest takeaway for me is we're doing something right for him to take the Rockets over. I'm sure trades just happen. Teams are, reshaping their roster. There's no way that a guy that is a career 39% shooter from three doesn't have a market. I mean, he was making, I think, close to $10 million just last year in the contract that he was bought out of by the Spurs. So I'm sure there was competition to get him, and he chose to come here. Whether that is on the situation and Rockets being an up-and-coming team, whether that is because he feels like he'll get playing time or more playing time or more guaranteed playing time here than he would on other teams. Usually, regardless of these two factors, these guys go to contenders because they want to win championships. The last factor I would mention is probably Ime Udoka. I don't know if he ever worked with Udoka in the past. I don't think so off the top of my head. But, we've heard from basically every corner of insiders in basketball that Ime Udoka has a really good relationship and he is really good with the players. So it's probably a combination of all of these factors, but it's still, with all of the negativity that came with KPJ and everything that happened with him and the Rockets culture, I think it speaks volumes that was probably the best free agent on the market, and the Rockets were able to get him for as big of a price as large of a price as any other team could have offered him.
Yeah, as I understand it, it's a 1-year minimum. And of course, it shows that unlike the Spurs, who clearly are still in phase one of their rebuilding project, even with Wemby, the Rockets are trying to accelerate this to phase two, which makes sense for a number of reasons, not just the veteran signings, but the fact that you don't own your draft capital unless it's in the top 4 after this season. So the Rockets are trying to win. And beyond Ime Udoka being a player's coach, I think this is also one feather in the cap for the argument of being viewed as a player-friendly organization, because part of what I think is going on here with the price, I think, Bullock is getting paid by the Spurs. So he's already getting a fair market rate for his services. He's now 32 years old, still a very good 3-and-D wing. Unlike KPJ, he'll accept the role, which is optimal for the Rockets, as you were just laying out. And I think what's probably going on here is that there's a degree of trust between Bullock and the Rockets, and also Bullock's agent and Rafael Stone, the front office of the Rockets, that if things don't go well, or if the Rockets just aren't in playoff contention by March 1st, my guess is that the Rockets will simply buy him out of this contract and waive him and let him go to the contender of his choice. In this way, when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense for a guy like Bullock, in that he has the leverage to command a role with a team like the Rockets. He can go out for the first 4 or 5 months of the season and play a decent amount of minutes, hopefully look like a key cog, lifting a young team or helping lift a young team to the next level, providing value on both offense and defense. And then as far as the ring chasing components that typically accompany a veteran of his age in the NBA, if he wants to do that, if it doesn't look like the Rockets are going to have a chance themselves to make a playoff push, then all the Rockets have to do is waive him by March 1st, and he can get picked up by a contender and still get the ring chasing part of this. So he can sort of have the best of both worlds, build his resume in Houston, get opportunities to put up some numbers. And then if things aren't going well from a team perspective, then there's always the ability to do that at a later date. And by making a 1-year minimum, it's all the easier for the Rockets to just let him go and easily latch on with someone else or even be claimed by someone else. But that does require a certain amount of trust between the player and his agent, and in this case, the Rockets, the team that owns his rights, to do right by him and not trade him against his will or try and keep him even though he doesn't want to be there. We saw this with Danny Green at the deadline last year. Remember that? When the Rockets initially said that they were open to keeping him, but clearly the fit wasn't right on the player's side, so they let him go. And I think that's the sort of thing that resonates with other players around the league and agents. And so I think this is the kind of thing that being viewed as a player-friendly organization can potentially do. It can get veterans to give you the benefit of the doubt, even if your team isn't at the normal spot of its contending cycle, if you will. Rockets not quite there yet to justify this type of move. And yeah, I think it's a great move on a number of levels. He's the best player on the market. He fills a need. I asked Ime Udoka at the start of Media Day on Monday how they plan to fill KPJ's role from a basketball standpoint, and he mentioned Cam Whitmore. I left the door open for an external addition. Neither Ime nor Rafael took the bait, and as it turns out, less than 24 hours later, there is an external addition. But I just think it's great for the Rockets. And as far as the role, we can talk 3-and-D. I know there are some with Dallas that think there was some regression a year ago. But honestly, Paolo, my view from the outside, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of it was circumstantial. Everyone agrees in 2022 that Reggie Bullock was a fantastic 3-and-D wing for a Dallas team that went to the Western Conference Finals. There's some metrics that show a bit of slippage in 2023, but as I see it, the real situation that was driving a lot of the overall metrics at a team level in Dallas was how much the surrounding infrastructure changed. In 2022, you had Bullock and Dorian Finney-Smith. In 2023, you had the transition to Christian Wood. You lost Dorian Finney-Smith and replaced him with Kyrie Irving. There was a huge step back for the Mavericks overall as a team on the defensive end. And so if you're a guy like Reggie Bullock and you're basically on an island and you don't have much help, of course you're going to look worse relative to a year in which you do have another dynamic perimeter defender. And of course, in Houston, there'll still be Dylan Brooks. There'll be Fred VanVleet. It's not like Reggie's going to be the only guy that can defend. So when I look at 2022 and 2023, not going to say it's impossible. There's slippage. He did go from 31 to 32 years old. He is a 10-year veteran, so crazier things have happened. But I think the bigger story in terms of Mavs fans thinking there's a little bit of a decline, to me, it seems more likely that just the surrounding infrastructure changed, and that's why he might not have looked quite as dynamic as he did in that 2022 playoff run. That's sort of how I contextualize it. As background, Bullock was traded to San Antonio for financial reasons in July as part of the 3-team deal that got Grant Williams to the Mavericks, basically a younger 3-and-D type wing. But in terms of his ability, if you put him in a better construct, and I think what the Rockets have now with Ime and Fred and Dylan could be that, I don't know if he'll go all the way back to 2022 form, but I think he could recapture a lot of it. I think that's a fair expectation, right?
Yeah, I mean, he played the shooting. I think when you put it into context, I have a really tough time judging someone's defense when they're forced to play next to Christian Wood. I mean, we've been through that. We know how that goes. And Luke is not exactly a good defender, and Kyrie Irving, I mean, he can do it, but he's not exactly, a lockdown guy either. So just and we're talking about the Dallas Mavericks team that fell out of the playoffs. I mean, I think they tanked a couple of games towards the end, but they did fall out of the play-in picture. I mean, so that's one thing. The other thing that I'll mention is it's not like he has to play the 2 all the time to be the backup 2. Lineups are fluid, and what the Rockets have is plenty of defensive wings. Even if he took a step back defensively, Dylan Brooks, Tari Eason, Jayshawn Tate are all guys that are going to be more than comfortable guarding the 2 if he needs to slip to the 3 in certain lineups. Right, I think that the biggest asset that he does bring, I mean, defensive wings, we have plenty of them. I don't think we'll have any trouble with that. But
yeah.
And
to your point, he's 6'7". He's thick. He can guard a number of positions. The metric that I brought up today was the defensive matchup difficulty from Basketball Index. And top 10 players a year ago on defense, Dylan Brooks was, of course, number 1, but number 9 on that list, Reggie Bullock. And what that tells you, the reason I wanted to pull out defensive matchup difficulty is that he was always going up against the best player on other teams because Dallas had no one else. So when we evaluate his performance from a year ago, sure, you can look at the top line numbers. He shot 38% from three, averaged about 8 points a game in 30 minutes. And in terms of his perimeter defense, of course, there's a lot of sort of mixed reviews. And when a team underachieves the way Dallas did, a lot of people are going to be looked at in a less favorable light. But when you look at what he was asked to do, top 10 in the NBA in defensive matchup difficulty, to me, that's pretty useful context to whatever he did last season. And that's before you even go into the Christian Wood factors, Kyrie Irving, No Dorian, Finney-Smith, et cetera.
Yeah, I would just add on top of that as a guy, and obviously I'm not gonna claim to be someone who's gone really in depth into Reggie Bullock's career, but just looking at his stats, we're looking at a guy that has taken throughout his career. He topped out at 10 shots a game, but for the most part, 6, 7, 8 shots a game, and has still managed to average over an assist, sometimes 2 assists a game, throughout the last 5 or 6 years of his career, while having always over a 2 assist to turnover ratio, which just looking at the stat makes me think that he's a willing mover of the ball, even if it's just.
And it makes you think he's high IQ, which is something the Rockets have clearly targeted.
Even if it's just making the extra pass and being a connector, and not taking a bad shot when there's a great one available. I know it's also Reggie Bullock, and when he's hot, he's going to keep shooting. That's a good thing. But I think that's something that the Rockets value, especially in a team with a lot of young guys. And besides that, I also wanted to touch on something that you said earlier about agent relationships. I looked up who his agent is, and it's David Bauman of Relativity Sports.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a connection to he is also the agent of a previous Rocket, which is Garrison Matthews, who was someone who, if we remember correctly, was on the Celtics. Not forced, but as a two-way guy, teams are not going to hold on to you if you think you have a better opportunity. But he got out of the Celtics to go to the Rockets, who he thought could give him a chance, and eventually capitalized that into a Hinkie special deal, which it is a minimum deal, but for a guy that's on a two-way, that's 10 times what he usually makes on a two-way, and he's still in the league. He's still playing with the Hawks, in part due to his production, but that has to be. The Rockets are the team that gave him that contract and gave him that opportunity. So maybe there's something to the fact that the Rockets did cultivate a positive relationship with his agent, and it may have helped. It doesn't mean that it was make or break, but it never hurts to have the agent tell, hey, I had an experience with a guy that somewhat does the same stuff you do with the Rockets, and they were willing to work with me, and he got a role there, and whatever that went down. I'm sure his agent wasn't drawing him away from Houston. And at the end of the day, it is a minimum signing, but it is a pretty clinical minimum signing, because if you were looking, it's bringing in a proven shooter, another vet, and at the same time, this late into the market, if you wanted to get someone like that, you'd likely get a Garrison Matthews type of guy that can shoot but can't really do anything else, or is undersized, or one of 100 million different things. You'd get a Ben McLemore type in the best case scenario, and Bullock's a little bit more than just a floor spacer, and he won't hurt the team defensively like what most of the guys available that are labeled shooters that Rockets could get right now would.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that, I guess, to try and tie it all together from a basketball perspective in the contract, I think you have to put a big asterisk on the idea that Reggie is a minimum guy. Technically he is, but the reason he's a minimum guy, he's already getting paid double-digit millions from the Spurs, and he's hitting the market effectively during the season. If he was on the market during July when the Rockets had all that cap space, he's the type of guy that could have gotten close to the mid-level exception, say $10 million or so for 2 or 3 seasons, and nobody would have batted an eye. In fact, a lot of Rockets fans might have preferred Bullock as an alternative to Dillon Brooks on the contracts that they were given. Now, of course, the Rockets have both. But this idea that he can't make an impact because he's a minimum guy, no, the minimum is just purely circumstantial based on the timing of his release, and he's willing to sign for relatively small because he's already getting paid a certain amount by the Spurs based on his previous contract. So he's already getting his market rate. So because of that, he can think a bit more situational in terms of what's going to give him the best chance to earn his next contract. He will be a free agent next off season. So clearly he thinks Houston could be a tool towards that. From a Rockets perspective, I think they view him as an ideal 3-and-D bench guy. In many ways, you're actually in a better spot than you were when you had KPJ, because there's no question in terms of whether Bullock will accept the role that you're looking for. So in many respects, it's bizarre how we got here, but strictly in terms of X's and O's and the basketball fit this season and what you're trying to do, you may actually be in a better place now than you were a month ago before all of this absolute chaos related to the Kevin Porter Jr. arrest fallout started to happen. So can't say that the Rockets planned this, but ultimately some of it's planning and some of it's you have to stay adaptable and adjust on the fly. And I think that's something the Rockets deserve credit for doing. And clearly, whether it's Ime Udoka, whether it's Rafael Stone, whether it's Tillman Fertitta, whether it's some combination of all of them, they made the sale, they got it done. And so kudos to them for getting a guy who I think can be a real difference maker for Ime Udoka, not just in terms of on-court production, but also in terms of just setting the right tone for this group and really providing the type of infrastructure on the practice court and the locker room that has real professionals around that so many members of your young core could benefit to learn from. Now, I do want to say, as far as the front office elements and being viewed as a player-friendly organization, this is not a blanket endorsement, because you can fairly criticize that strategy, particularly within the context of Brook Lopez, where clearly the Rockets thought they had a deal. They perhaps trusted a bit too much there and got burned. You can also point to the ensuing Usman Garuba and Ty Washington dump, which cost them a couple of second-round picks that they didn't even need to do based on Brook Lopez reneging on them. Those deals, both believing they had something with Brook and having all the other things in motion to accommodate that, be it relations with a player and or his agent, be it relations with other teams, that's part of that same dynamic. And you can argue that perhaps it was harmful in those circumstances. So it's not to say that being this player-friendly organization is great no matter what. No, not saying that. All I'm saying is that just as we note the negatives when they occur, we should note the positives, which I think this is potentially an example of as well. And then at the end of the day, over a larger sample, you can sort of compare and contrast the good, the bad, and see ultimately how it impacts your future. Now, as far as the Kevin Porter Jr. angle, beyond just simply replacing the basketball, I want to talk about the trade component, because we've done recent episodes here at the Logger Line about the trade possibilities in the Rockets, because they want to replace not just Kevin Porter Jr., the basketball player, but also Kevin Porter Jr., the contract, because he's useful filler down the line for trades. You mentioned the possibility of perhaps using the room at MLE to do something similar with Bullock, but my guess is that he actually preferred the flexibility of a 1-year minimum deal that wouldn't have the team on the hook for anything major, because my guess is that if for one reason or another it's not working out or the team isn't that good, then this is the cleanest way for him to again become a free agent come February or by the beginning of March, and then he can have his choice of contenders at that time if for whatever reason he doesn't want to be in Houston. But regardless, the Rockets do need more trade filler on top of Jeff Green and Jock Landale. We've talked about that before. And in my opinion, what this does for the Rockets, it gives you considerably more options on the KPJ front. I think before now, the thought was that the Rockets needed to replace both the contract and the basketball in the same transaction. That's when we were talking about guys like Landry Shamet and Alec Burks. And this weekend, as you mentioned, after Malcolm Brogdon went to the Trailblazers, who are clearly rebuilding after the Damian Lillard trade, we talked about potentially going after Malcolm Brogdon. Because the idea is that those types would both replace the contract of KPJ and the basketball in terms of the shooting, at least some defense and positional versatility, some IQ in the case of Brogdon, and so on and so forth. Now that you've replaced the basketball with Reggie Bullock, you have a lot more flexibility in terms of the contracts that you go after. It doesn't have to be a 3-and-D wing. It doesn't have to be a guard. It can be a big man. you have a much broader pool to choose from. So, in my opinion, the odds of a Kevin Porter Jr. trade actually went up today because now there's a lot more players that you can potentially find a match for. And I don't know that it's going to happen within the next few days. My guess is that the real inflection point is closer to the end of training camp and the preseason, once teams are starting to cut down their roster and there's guys in which teams are sort of looking at the roster and say, well, I need to free up a spot anyway. This guy isn't in my long-term future. So if I'm thinking of waiving this guy anyway, but instead I can waive Kevin Porter Jr. and get a couple of second-round picks for doing that, then something may materialize. But the way I look at it, because the Rockets aren't trying to fill both basketball and contract with the KPJ trade, now they're just trying to fill the contract side. It's not a guarantee that a deal works out by the end of the preseason when these cuts start happening, but I think the odds went up a decent bit today. That's sort of my view as to the trickle-down effect. Am I missing anything in that analysis?
No, I think you're pretty spot on.
Okay. Then I think we can put a bow on the Reggie Bullock discussion for now and move on to training camp and media day, because there's been a lot going on. Media day Monday at Toyota Center, training camp opening Tuesday out at McNeese State University in Lake Charles. Rockets doing the first few days of their training camp away from Houston the same way a number of NBA teams do. They get outside their home market because the idea, you go to a non-traditional location, then it forces the team, the players, the coaches to sort of bond, not just on the practice court, but they hang out off it as well. It's not like they can go home and back into their normal lives. So the idea is for it to be something of a bonding experience. Of course, some of the Rockets already had that in the Bahamas last month, but so far the vibes seem good. The chemistry seems good. And as far as things that stand out, I'm honestly not surprised by this, but to me, the biggest individual guy that's flashed in the practice clips I've seen today, the videos, the quotes I heard yesterday, what I saw of him in person because I was there at Toyota Center, is Jabari Smith Jr. He had a great summer league. He seems remarkably confident. He seems stronger. The practice clips today, he seems a lot more fluid with his body. We actually saw him taking it off the dribble and throwing it down over Tari Eason, which is just something that a year ago I don't think he can physically do. You can see the effects of not just the strength training, but the yoga. He seems much more nimble. And that's why I think, and we've covered it in the past, the hype over his summer league was warranted, because even if you want to say it's summer league, these are mostly guys in their first couple of years and guys who aren't going to be in the NBA. Well, just comparing 2023 summer league to 2022, he was doing things now that physically he could not have done in that same setting a year ago. And so I think certainly when you hear him talk, he seems like a very intelligent guy. He's picked up on this. And then when you watch him on the floor, again, I know we're parsing through just 12 minutes of practice footage today, reporters let in at the very end. But to me, the signs have been there for a while that this is going to be a breakthrough year for Jabari Smith. And I know the sample is small. We're just talking about a couple of interviews and a few practice clips, but I have not seen anything to change my mind. Are you on the same page on that?
Yeah, I mean, the first takeaway is he pops into the screen and he's huge.
Right.
And it's usually people post these social media pictures from Instagram on Twitter and say, namely Jalen, oh, he's so much bigger and whatever. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I really can't tell the difference. With Jabari, he's notably he's like twice as thick as, at least his arms are twice as thick as they used to be. So I think that's big. Especially because he struggled to defend, bulkier centers because of that. And then that will also help him absorb contact on drives. But to me, the biggest thing with him is it's always going to be this. He the shot, the 3-point shot, the spacing needs to be there. That's the make or break. If the shot's there, he's going to be a 15-year player in the NBA. If the shot's not there, even if he develops all of the inside game necessary, it's still going to be tough. But the physical transformation, I know a lot of people have said this. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the physical transformation is a part of why his shot was lagging a year ago. It's not as if, or at least it shouldn't be, that he's forgotten how to shoot. To me, the most plausible explanation for what he went through for most of his rookie year, I know he showed some signs towards the end, was going back 3 or 4 feet to the NBA 3-point line And just his body, we should also note that at 19, he's one of the youngest guys in the entire draft class. He just wasn't physically ready. And by transforming his lower half and adding strength, then he should be in a lot better position this year to shoot the way he has the rest of his life.
Yeah, I agree, and I think, I mean, I didn't really notice how much different he looks on his lower half through the clips, but just in the press conference, his shoulders and his arms are a lot stronger. And one of the things that people, well, we had a number of theories about why Jabari was struggling, and people were saying that he's not using his legs enough. Well, if your arms are strong enough, maybe you don't need to use your legs that much. But yeah, with Jabari, he also, as always, he's great on the mic. He's very, very, very aware of what he needs to do. He sounds like a leader, right? Jalen's probably the main guy of this franchise still, but Jabari on the mic is still very much looks a lot more. I'm not gonna say mature because Jalen doesn't look immature, but he sounds a lot more professional, while Jalen sounds a lot more goofy, and just they're different personalities. Not saying Jabari isn't fun, but he was very focused, and I like that, and I like the contrast in personalities that we have. Just
I thought
because
Jalen was actually a lot more outgoing yesterday. By the way, he was one of the guys I worried about. I sort of wondered in the back of my mind. I was never going to ask any of the players about KPJ. Of course, you're going to ask Ime and Rafael about that because they're adults, they're leaders of the organization. But these other young guys, it's not fair on such a positive day for them to ask them about this awful situation that they had nothing to do with. There's no reason to bring them down. But I did sort of wonder if their mood, especially someone like Jalen, who's been relatively close with KPJ the last couple of years, might be a bit subdued based on all the chaos of the last few weeks. No, he seemed in a great mood. He seemed ready to go. If anything, he seemed more confident and just really feeling good in his own skin relative to the last couple of years. So, if anything, I thought Jalen was more outgoing and better on the mic this year than the last couple.
Yeah, I think so as well. I was mostly talking about just his tone of voice and the way he speaks. But I do agree with you, and I wonder how much of that was overblown in his relationship with KPJ, because he didn't seem bummed at all. I was worried that because he was so close with KPJ that he'd post something dumb on social media. I know he's very PR aware, but I was just afraid because these are young guys, right? It doesn't make him a bad person, but sometimes off the cuff they may post something, and wouldn't be the first time it has been done either. But
I think one thing that may have prepared him for it, if you paid attention on social media, you could tell that the guy who he was actually closest with the last couple of years on a personal level was KJ Martin. And so I think having to sort of part ways with KJ, obviously very different circumstances, that was purely for basketball reasons at the end of June. But I think that just sort of underscores that, yeah, this is a business and people come and go for various reasons. And so while the circumstances are wildly different, I think Jalen having to go through earlier this offseason, losing KJ, the process of building a relationship with Fred VanVleet and all of their training, it just sort of underscored that this is a business and you've got to get with it.
Yeah, I think a part of it, I think KJ was definitely the guy he was closest with. But I wonder if Jalen just one of those guys that just gets along with everyone, because I mean, how long did it take for Fred VanVleet to become his new big bro? It was KPJ like 3 months or 6 months ago. Maybe he just gets along with everyone, which is a good thing. Even his game is very complimentary of playmakers just because of how useful he is off ball. Establishing that chemistry early is definitely good. But Jalen was just Jalen. He did mention a lot. I thought it was funny because he was constantly avoiding, first of all, he was constantly mentioning the small things, defense, and everything like that. And then someone asked him wanting to win, and someone asked him specifically what those meant, and he went into playing defense and everything. And he said something to the I don't have the exact quote, but he said something to the extent of actually not wanting to do it, but actually doing it, which made me think, these guys are there, and as much as they say that they're locked in, when you're a rebuilding team, guys take possessions off. Everybody's not taking it that serious. Why would you? And some guys have the motor, like Tarisan has the motor to not care about that and not let that affect him. But Jalen, a scoring guard, you could tell that he wasn't, trying his best. And I thought he was kind of tiptoeing around saying that about his previous season when he was saying, just taking care of the small things. Because I think he was capable of doing it. He was just not doing it because the season went to shit so soon, so quickly that he focused on. He also mentioned making it a priority, to win games, which implies that the priority might not have been that previously. So I got a lot of the vibe of this is different because now I actually really, really care without actually saying it, because it would, if there's one thing Taylor knows, that people will take anything out of context, and then, it will be a quote going viral on social media as quickly as he says it. But so he didn't say it, but I got the vibe that that's what he meant. And I think we all know that's kind of what he meant, because he always had tools, he showed flashes. It just wasn't, exactly trying his best every single game.
Yeah. Another thing that really jumped out at me from Media Day, and of course, we all should have expected this, but just the sheer quantity of veterans. And now there's one more in Reggie Bullock. The feel is just night and day from a year ago when it was basically Eric Gordon, Boban, and Jayshawn Tate. And Tate wasn't even out there for most of the season due to injury. And as we've talked about in the past, Eric Gordon was largely checked out a year ago, I think largely for reasons related to his contract and also just at his age and stature in the NBA. For someone like him to be in the Rockets rebuild, the depths of that for a third straight year, it just eventually got really, really hard. So basically, you had three vets. One was hurt, one was checked out, the other was Boban, who rarely played. And at some point, it's just sort of like they're just token guys. They're around, but there's not enough of them to truly guide the culture and shape the foundation of the team. As opposed to now, when you look at the steady stream of Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, Jeff Green, Jock Landale, you've got to throw Landale in with Jayshawn Tate as a vet, even though he's relatively young in his NBA years. You're talking guys that are 27, 28 that have played a number of years internationally as a professional. They count. And then Boban, Tate, the guys that were around last year, and now Reggie Bullock as well. You're looking at a locker room that's truly a 50-50 blend between your core six, your young guys, Jalen and Jabari, Tari and Cam Whitmore and Amin Thompson and Alperen and Shingun. Now you've got a truly 50-50 blend. And so in terms of setting the standard on the court, off the court, professionalism, attention to detail, if you're not doing those things, which Jalen's someone who didn't the last couple of years at times, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb a lot more. And that tends to sort of force players to conform into better habits, as opposed to like a year ago, if the entire team is really young and everybody else has many of the same issues, then there's not that peer pressure to get better. Even as critical as we've been of Stephen Silas, I would assume that many of these issues are being pointed out on film. But at the same time, if the same issues are being pointed out with nearly everybody else, how much pressure is there to get better? It's not like there would have been any real consequences. I thought one thing that was revealing in our conversation with Ime on Monday, he mentioned that if Kevin had been here and everything hadn't happened the way it did, there would have been an open competition at shooting guard between Jalen and Kevin. Now, if it was close for reasons we've discussed in the past, I think the tiebreaker would have gone to Jalen for a number of reasons. But just the fact that even a guy like Jalen, the leading scorer from a year ago, number 2 overall draft pick, their highest from an asset cost of this entire rebuild in terms of sinking second overall in a strong draft, for him not to be guaranteed, that speaks volumes to the culture the Rockets are trying to put in place. And it's not just any one veteran. They all had nice things to say. Boy, you could really see why Fred VanVleet was the guy you want as the star leading your team. I asked him about if he realized how unusual the situation is for a recent All-Star. Again, this is someone who in 2022 made the All-Star team to go to one of the league's worst without a co-star and in a market that's not the Knicks or the Lakers. It's fairly unusual in NBA history. And his immediate response was, I have no ego. I'm not too good to play in Houston. He talked about wanting to make this team better. And then, of course, he got to what really, I think, drove the decisions. Besides financial, that's part of it. I saw some people saying, Ben, it's about money. Well, that's part of it. But because he's only on a 2-year deal, I really don't think 2 years at the max for Fred is all that unreasonable. I think if he and his agent had shopped themselves around the league at that figure, they could have found some opportunities. I think where things really went Houston's direction was projecting out into the future. And that's what he mentioned. And when you look at not just this season, but by the end of the season, next season, and these young guys taking the step forward, and the Rockets, of course, supplementing that with other additions in terms of what they did this offseason, whatever they hope to do on the trade market, where we've talked about their potential to make some blockbuster trades down the line. The Rockets are a team that, for a number of reasons, are set up pretty well now, but potentially very good by a year or two from now. And so I think that played into Fred's calculus, and he's a very thoughtful guy. And so it was great to hear from him on that front. With Dillon, he talked about wanting to mold Jabari and Tari into two of the league's better defenders. I think he's perfect for them. Jock Landale, you mentioned it on your timeline, Paolo, that we need to get him on the podcast because he's got the most.
Yeah, I need a rant on Jock Landale.
Okay,
dude.
Cut me off there. Go.
Listen, Jock Landale was a meme before anybody had heard of him. He was on the Spurs, and now I sometimes help run some mock off seasons for a Discord server, and I was chilling on a call, just filling out the spreadsheets with a friend of mine, and just this dude Jock Landale comes up, and the name's funny just by itself. And we go and check his stats. And at that point, he was shooting like 60, 50, 90 or something for the Spurs on a few games played. And I'm like, who is this guy? And so he was already on the radar. And now he comes into this press conference. And I mean, so he had an ankle injury, right?
Yeah.
And someone asked him if he has recovered. And he says something to the effect of, yeah, I'm jumping as high as I ever have, mate. And everybody's laughing at the mate, but he doesn't realize it, or he does and makes a joke anyway. And he screams, "What are you guys laughing about? I'm athletic as hell," which I'm guessing is an implication on him being, Australian and white, and those guys usually not typically being the most athletic
above the rim.
And I'm just like rolling on the floor, like laughing, like in my room, and this dude's insane. And he goes on to just having one of the best press conferences I've ever seen. He, he's well spoken. He hit the nail on the head when he talked about, liking or having liked to play the role of just being an energy big and getting boards and boxing out and all of those little things that help increase the floor of a team. Players know this, and players know this is the right thing to say. It doesn't mean that everybody says it, and he looked like he meant it. And I think he's just a very mature guy. He was a guy that didn't get drafted. He had to claw his way into the league. And I mean, he's a good basketball player. Don't get me wrong, but he's a great personality. And I just had the best of time listening to him speak. And before we move back onto you, I also wanted to mention because you already touched on him. I think the biggest winner or the MVP of Media Day was actually Dillon Brooks. I listened to his, I think it was a 12-minute question session, whatever it was, and I saw a guy that did a lot of introspective thinking throughout the offseason. I saw a guy that was really heavily punished by the media, and that looked within himself to figure out what he could change, what he couldn't change, and what he had to do moving forward. And I saw a guy that acknowledged that he has a side that people don't really like, but also a guy that accepted that he has that side, and is vowing to keep that side on the court where he can use it as fuel to play better basketball, while also we haven't seen him on the court yet, but off the court, realizing that there are things that he can change about his game, and that just because he already got this contract it doesn't mean that he's made it, right? He realizes that there's other things that he can get better at, and usually with guys that have that are inefficient because of shot selection, most of them, when that happens, it's because they refuse to acknowledge that they have a bad shot selection. Russell Westbrook, the first example of this. And for him to acknowledge that, and he talked about it, I mean, on a defensive end, that was mostly what I contributed, and then being self-reflective and say enough to say, and yet on the offensive end, I do need to get better, namely with shot selection, and that's something that he has worked on. To acknowledge that publicly without having any question that would, I think the question that prompted this answer was, how does he think he can contribute? Which is a very open-ended question, which any player would have taken to, hey, I'm going to help defend and be a leader, and an X and Y intangible thing that everybody replies to this with. But he took it and he said, hey, I can help defensively. I already helped last year defensively on my team, and the thing I can get better at is my shot selection and what I can do offensively. And that recognition is the first step towards a guy that did have terrible shot selection. That's why most people didn't want him to come to Houston, especially for the price that he ended up coming here for. But acknowledging that you need to change that and is huge. And I'm not saying that it's going to be a dramatic difference from what he has been, because he is still the same player. But to walk or towards being better, with his shot selection is definitely huge. And I just saw a guy that, was very aware of what the public view of him was, and that took it to heart, and that, looked at himself in the mirror and thought, how can I get better? Didn't get, I mean, I'm sure he was frustrated, but it wasn't a revenge type of thing. He wasn't mad about it. It looked like just a guy that, took his time to process things. And he did, let out that he's watching out for all four of the games. I think it's for all four of the games that Rockets have against the Grizzlies, and that he will take those personally. And I mean, who wouldn't? They basically kicked them out, and before even exploring any option, said, we're not bringing you back, which can help you in a free agency situation. I mean, his agent must have been pissed about that, and then having, I think Dylan Brooks will never have a motivation issue. He does have a chip on his shoulder. That will never be a problem. So toning it down a little bit and recognizing that there's stuff he can change to get better is huge for me, because this is a team with a lot of guys that are going to take shots. Fred VanVleet's going to take shots. Jalen's going to take shots. Eventually Jabari is going to take shots. Şengün's going to take shots. Amen Thompson's going to take shots. Dylan Brooks is going to take shots as well, but with so many guys that need shots, each and every one of them getting the best shots possible becomes all of the more important, because when you take a bad shot, you now have 3 or 4 guys on the court looking at you thinking, hey, that's a trash shot, and they all believe that they could have done better. This isn't a James Harden situation where he's playing with 4 role players around him, and it's like, oh, he's James Harden, he gets to take that shot, and not only that, that shot's probably better than what I could have created with the ball in my hands by myself. No, this is a team where a lot of guys are going to look at him and say, hey, Jabari's going to think, hey, I could have gotten a poster or a jump shot out of this. Jalen will think I could have gotten a step back or blown by you. Fred VanVleet I could have pulled up from the same spot you did and probably made the shot, whatever it is. Şengün will think the same thing. So it's all the more important, specifically in the team he landed, that he take that approach. And I was really impressed. And people said since the beginning that since he was signed, that eventually he'd become a fan favorite, and he's taken a huge step towards that in my book.
Yeah, I think he is already. I think that's pretty clear. The Canada World Cup runs sort of spark those flames a little bit in terms of getting Rockets fans on board, and really, I would say beyond just this fan base, around the NBA as a whole, sort of setting up this Dylan Brooks redemption arc. Again, we saw it to an extent in the World Cup, but I think by and large, when we're talking about stuff that's largely superficial, it's not like he's done anything that's particularly low character. then I think people are open to the idea that you can grow and improve and learn. And with Dylan, the gifts are there, obviously, on the defensive end. And certainly as a shooter, it's not that he can't shoot, it's about the shot selection. So having the self awareness, having the mid career growth, and especially if he can go to one of the league's worst teams and help orchestrate a turnaround, then yeah, I think the intensity he plays with is going to make him a fan favorite here in Houston. And I think around the league, there's a lot more people than he might realize that I think are going to be open to him sort of going on a redemption arc, if you will, and sort of restoring his name around the league. And you made a great point a few episodes ago in regards to that contract, 4 years, 80 plus million. For some, you might worry about the player taking the foot off the gas when they get a big deal. With him, it may actually give him the peace of mind to sort of take a step back and get that mental clarity that you were speaking to and self-reflect, because it's not like he's just feeling that every game he has to be the MVP, a guy who just takes it over because he's got to prove something to the world. No, now he can just be himself. He can take a step back. And I think we're starting to see signs of that. Certainly, he was very good in his interview. You could argue for him as the MVP of Media Day interviews. I was very close with Dylan. I would still go with Fred simply because I think when you're looking at a rebuilding team who just signed a guy for $40+ million a year, it would be so easy for a guy like that to go in with a big head and think that it's his franchise, that he's above everyone else. And I think when you have by far your highest salaried player to adopt such a selfless approach and be ready to be one of 15, I think that speaks volumes to the culture the Rockets are trying to establish. Even if guys like Jalen and Jabari and Şengün or Amen ultimately turn into stars, then I think the hope for the Rockets is beyond just what Fred can do for them as a point guard. I think their hope is that those guys can look to Fred and see what it means to be a good leader, a good teammate. And I think that's why they ultimately viewed him as the ideal fit. And perhaps they'll be right with choosing Fred over James Harden. As far as the rest, I think you could certainly make an argument for Jeff Green in that Media Day MVP discussion. He gave a very impassioned rant about the role of veterans in the NBA and why teams, not just rebuilding teams like Houston, where clearly you need maturity, but he also talked about how guys such as himself, DeAndre Jordan, Ish Smith were vital to the NBA championship they just won a couple of months ago in Denver. For me, it was more, as mentioned earlier, just the steady stream of veterans. They're all so likable when you look at Jeff Green, Jock Landale, obviously Fred and Dylan, Jayshawn Tate, and the last was actually Boban. And one of the questions to Boban, beyond just, Boban's always an affable, very likable guy, and he's a great quote. But someone asked him about, did it feel like there's just far more veterans along with him this year? And his answer, I forgot exactly what he said, but basically, yeah, because there is. And ultimately, that's what's so important. Jeff Green talked about in his answer about the role of veterans that a coach's word can only go so far. Sometimes you need guys in the locker room. Well, sometimes beyond just having even guys in the locker room, they can say all the right things. And I'm sure Eric and Jayshawn and Boban tried to give guidance to young guys a year ago. But at the same time, if they're less than 20% of the team, how far can that advice really go when the 75 or 80% that's elsewhere is doing things that are perhaps bad habits and not doing the right things, be it on the court, on the practice court, just day-to-day life as an NBA professional. So when you have a quantity to this extent, and now you're adding Reggie Bullock as well, then it's not just about the schemes the coaches put in place. Yes, we think Ime Udoka and his staff is a big upgrade over Stephen Silas and his staff. But in terms of, I've seen a little bit of a counter narrative developing on Rockets Twitter that I don't really agree with. This idea that Rockets fans are too optimistic about Ime Udoka solving all of these problems. Well, if it's strictly Ime versus Stephen Silas, yes, I think even if you're down on Stephen, which both of us are, at the end of the day, even if Ime's a top 5, top 10 coach, there's only so much that can be reasonably expected from just a 1-for-1 upgrade. But it's not just that. I mean, you do have an entire staff of assistants beneath them as well. Ben Sullivan looked great at Summer League. But beyond that, it's also the players in the locker room, and not just what they say, but the example they set. And when you see all those guys with a great attitude, doing the little things, trying to help their younger teammates, when that's 50% or more of the locker room, how does that not have an effect on someone like Jalen Green or Amin Thompson or Alperen Şengün or anyone else that you're trying to develop? So beyond just the overall sort of mentorship on the court at practice, Jacques Landale talked about wanting to improve Şengün defensively and challenging him and his effort, which you would expect. That's why I think the Rockets view them as a good center pairing. Beyond all of that, I just think having so many veterans that are very likable and embracing this rebuild of the Rockets and the point they are, again, this is not like an Eric Gordon situation where it's somewhat of a fish out of water with regards to just not being comfortable with where the Rockets are. There's no guarantee of success. This is still a very young team that hasn't proven anything. And other than Portland and San Antonio, there's really no one else in the West that's clearly, in my opinion, a tier below the Rockets. So it's not like wins are going to be easy. But as long as Ime Udoka is who we think he is, it's tough not to see this team taking a step forward because, again, it's not just the coach. To see the steady stream of guys over the last 2 days and the vibes and everything that accompanies this new group, I think at a 30,000 foot view, it's just night and day compared to this time a year ago. That's my biggest takeaway of all.
Yeah, I'm with you. I actually meant to say this when we started the pod, but it's getting very real very quickly. We have talked about all of this in theory, in theory, Stephen Silas versus Ime Udoka is a massive gap. In theory, Jalen Green putting on weight is a massive difference. In theory, having, basically doubled or even more than that, the number of vets on the team is a big difference, especially when they're vets that are going to play roles on the team. The entire shift in dynamic from giving the most minutes to guys with the most potential from giving the most minutes to guys that play the best. Just Jabari getting out of his rookie season where he was basically one of the worst players in the NBA. When you look at all of the things that you can list on this team that got better, you could convince, you could say this team got, 3 times, 5 times better. That's how many problems this team had, which makes it hard to quantify how much they'll improve. They could, just get better by 6 or 7 games. They could get better by 20 games. Everything clicks. And you look at the coach, it's different. It's a massive upgrade at coaching. It's a massive upgrade at point guard. It's a massive upgrade in coaching. It's a massive upgrade in talent. The talent that you already have gets better. These guys are taking it seriously. The entire tanking mentality isn't there anymore. You could convince me that if everything clicks, they could improve by 20 games. They could win 40 games and make the play-in or be an 8 or be the 8 seed or whatever it is. It has happened before. Teams have made that kind of jump when faced with this much change. If everything clicks, all of that is in theory. Now, at least for me, it's starting to settle. Like, okay, this all looks really good on paper. How does it look in reality? Will Jalen Green be more efficient? Will Jabari Smith knock down his shots? Will Alperen Şengün hold up on the defensive end? Was Tari Eason's shooting last year sustainable? Will he still be have a respectable 3-point shot this season? Will Dylan Brooks have a better shot selection? Will Fred VanVleet bounce back from what was one of the worst seasons of his career since he's a starter last year? There's a lot of questions, and there's a lot of things that got better, but there's still also a lot of things that could go wrong. So it's as we get closer. I think we're a week away from the first preseason game.
Yeah, Tuesday the 10th.
Yeah, it's starting to settle in that hey, there's a lot at stake here. And there's a lot to be excited about, and there's a lot of stuff to be terrified about, because if it doesn't work, what really is the next step, right? But I don't want to get into that right now. I mean, hopefully we never have to get into that.
Right.
But it's, we've been talking in theory for so long. Now we're finally going to get to see it. And it doesn't help that I'm not going to get into this rant again. It doesn't help that the NBA offseason for a team that doesn't make the playoffs is basically 6 months, which is absurd. But all in all, my takeaway is it's great to have basketball back. I've missed it very dearly. I'm really excited to see what all of these guys can show. I'm really excited to see what Amen Thompson looks like. Even we've gotten to see one game of him. We got one game and he looked great. And how will he look now? I'm obviously extremely emotionally invested into what Jalen Green looks like. He is my favorite player. Will he? We've seen the talent. We saw that stretch to close out his rookie season where he looked like a borderline all-star, and then a lot of that went to shit the second year with the role change and all that happened within that year. KPJ is gone now. All that volatility is gone now. Will Jabari Smith finally look like what I think he will at the very least be in the ultimate 3 and D, switchable 1 through 5 wing? There's a lot of stuff to be excited about. We'll finally get basketball back. We'll finally get to watch games basically every other day, and when we start to see these clips pop up and these guys together, and when we see Fred VanVleet with the Rockets jersey on, and we get to finally start talking about Ime Udoka got into the defensive principles that he wants to instill, how early on he wants to credit to Jackson Gatlin for getting the clip up, how he wants to first get to the basics. There's going to be a lot of switching early on, and they'll progressively work towards a more complicated defensive scheme. Now we're talking about basketball again, right? And
Yep.
and it's really exciting to finally get back into it, because as much as it sucks that it was gone for 6 months, well, it's the way the basketball season works. It's not quite as much as baseball, but it instantly becomes a huge part of your life and your routine for the 6 months that it is on. So I'm
Very
just
much
happy it's back. I mean, people say, I think we're both more on the nerdy side of basketball fans, but people say the nerds don't actually enjoy the game. Dude, we love the game. Thank God it's back.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, for me, that's part of the draw to basketball and baseball. Shout out, by the way, to AL West champion Houston Astros. How stunning was that this weekend? But yeah, there is something to be said for the sports that have so many games that they're a daily part of your life. If you dive deep into the minutia and the trends and the learning and the growth, then I love football, but and soccer as well. I know you hate to call it soccer, but with American football and European football, let's look at it under those terms. The once or maybe twice a week on rare occasion sports, it's not quite the same as basketball and baseball, where it's not truly daily in the case of basketball, but between 3 or 4 games a week and oftentimes practices with some access on the other days. Yeah, you do get a much more intimate feel with watching the journey of these players and the team you follow. And if you're a nerd like we are, then yeah, it's great to have that back in your life. And October in particular is an amazing month because you have the return of the NBA. Regular season starts later this month, and somehow the Astros are back into the American League Division Series, and so we have that starting this weekend as well. Great time to be a Houston sports fan, and that's before even mentioning the Texans, who under CJ Stroud, 2-2 and on the upswing. Their rebuild is going well. Hopefully, the rebuild for the Rockets, which officially starts later this month, at least in terms of regular season games, goes just as well. One final thing I want to get out before we wrap up the pod. I would throw honorable mentions as far as things that stood out from media day and the training camp opening interviews. I liked when some of the players talked about what impressed them elsewhere on the roster, because you sort of know what they're going to say when you ask them about their own games. Everybody wants to be a better shooter. Everyone wants to defend better. And if you ask them specifically about another player, of course, they're going to be positive. That's just what you do. But if you leave a question somewhat open-ended, then it's interesting to see what they say about their teammates. And 2 little things that stood out. I actually asked Amen Thompson about anything that had surprised him about his teammates since they started scrimmaging in September, and specifically in the Bahamas. And he paused for a bit, and he mentioned that nothing had been too shocking because he had watched a lot of film prior to being drafted by the Rockets. Of course, everybody knew in the weeks leading up to the draft that Amen to the Rockets was a likely scenario, and he's a basketball junkie. So, of course, he watched all the team's games and knew a lot about these guys. But he mentioned after saying that and giving that disclaimer that Alperen Şengün's passing was even better than he had seen on film. And, of course, you notice Alperen Şengün's passing on film a lot. So for it to jump out even more in person, specifically for a point guard like Amen that really values passing at a high level and creativity, that really stood out to me. And then another endorsement. I don't know if you noticed this in the Alperen Şengün interview, Paolo, but he went out of his way to talk about the gifts of Fred VanVleet as a point guard. And I thought that was telling, not to necessarily throw shade at Kevin Porter Jr. specifically, but the reality is with KPJ in that position, the Rockets did not have a real point guard the last couple of years. And so I think for Şengün to go out of his way to point out the difference, now there is a true floor general in place, or a truer floor general, not like Fred is a prototype John Stockton, but at the end of the day, it shows you that there's three key playmakers to me. There's Fred, there's All-P, and there's Amen. And so for those guys to see the synergies within one another, to me, that speaks to the level of self-awareness that these guys will ultimately figure it out when it comes to not just succeeding individually, but all three of those guys sort of complementing each other and trying to sort of play off one another as well. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And while you made a lot of valid points, we're in a social media climate, as far as Rockets Twitter goes, where the media team is being accused of not asking the hard question. So I guess I'll ask the hard question: why did you not clap for Alperen Şengün when he was walking off stage?
Oh man, because I was actually trying to tweet something. That's the honest answer.
Yeah, nobody clapped for him, and he was mad about it. So
Jackson
he plays
did
poorly. Jackson did. See, why does Jackson?
Although to peel back the curtain, Jackson was so pissed at me. He sent me an angry text later. I didn't think about this because I had my laptop out. I was trying to both tweet and file stories and get them out as soon as I could. And apparently, I'm a loud typer. I've never heard that before. But yeah, if you listen to Jackson's media day interviews, which you can at the Locked on Rockets YouTube page, then especially the first half, you can hear me typing in the background, evidently. And it bothered Jackson because, of course, as host of a daily podcast, he's something of an audiophobe. He's going to listen for anything that might sort of be a hit to audio quality. But yeah, that's actually what happened. Yeah, he was one of the only guys that stood up. But yeah, All-P said that, and I wasn't even thinking because I was either tweeting or filing a story based on something he said. And then Jackson started clapping. And then I was like, oh, yeah, I should clap. So, yeah. If you're listening somehow, All-P, sorry, I will clap next time. I was not fully present. I was either on my phone or my laptop tweeting something. My bad. But if you know me, you should not be surprised that that's what I was doing. So,
and to be fair, just not to be too goofy, Alperen Şengün's English is on a completely different dimension to what it was.
For sure.
It's still not perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect. But it's very much at a more than communication level. It's really good. And beside that, I have one more remark about Jock Landale. Dude said, I gotta be honest, a big part of it was the financial side. And I'm like, dude, how can you not love someone that's that transparent?
Thank you for actually saying it. Yeah.
I think Fred VanVleet said something similar, not this time around, but back when he had this first presser as a Rockets player. I think so, yeah. And I just appreciate, guys, it's right there. It doesn't need to be an elephant in the room. You don't need to give a fake answer every time and say that you're interested in the project. And I'm sure they are, but a big part of it was the financial side. And just wanted to throw one. Oh no! But besides that one, I would also like to announce my Texans fandom. I was a Chiefs fan last year because I like Kelsey and Mahomes. I'm a Texans fan now.
You're all in.
CJ Stroud is the GOAT. He's the second best quarterback in the league just because I can't put him above Mahomes yet with all my football knowledge. I will be calling it football instead of American football out of respect for the audience.
There you go.
And the last one is, it is officially, as of 4 days ago, Jeremy Pena season.
There you go. Yeah, I think the play he made in that opener at Arizona that was stunning. That's the kind of tone setter. If he doesn't make that play, not only to stop it, but then to actually throw in time to first base, that's the kind of thing that sets a tone that, yeah, even against great pitching, low scoring games where the margins are incredibly small, that's the kind of thing that tells you, yeah, even though it's unlikely they had to sweep and the Rangers needed to lose at least 2 of 3, they can do their part. And I think slowly you started seeing the belief creep back in the Astros over that week. And yeah, kudos to Jeremy Pena. He's been low key, even though the power has gone away. He's had a better second half of the year than people think because he's driving the ball more. He's going opposite field. He's working walks. He's doing some of the little things. Hopefully, the power picks back up in the postseason, just like it did a year ago. But yeah, that was one of the key plays. I mean, it was brilliant defensively, but beyond that, to do it with 2 outs in the 8th inning, it's a tone setter. Kudos to Jeremy Pena, and now he's feeling good going to October, which was his month a year ago. Let's hope the same thing holds true this year. Astros can win another World Series in, well, maybe early November. But yeah, right around the same time the Rockets are kicking off their season and the Texans are finally relevant for the first time in years. What a great time it is to be a Houston sports fan. And with that, we can finally bring this episode to a close. If you want more content before we next come back, again, we'll be much more regular. Not sure when our next episode will be. Again, some of it's sort of conditional on when there's news, when there's a good quote, when there's something to learn from. At a bare minimum, I think we'll be back after the first preseason game or two, which again starts next Tuesday. But the bottom line, now that things are back in season, we'll have a lot more content, be it practices, quotes, press conferences, actual games to react to. And of course, we'll be hopefully one of your trusted sources of Rockets analysis here at the Logger Line throughout what should be a very fun 2023 to 24 season. All right, so we're done for tonight. A couple more plugs before we close out. I mentioned leading off the show, you can follow me on Twitter or X at Ben Dubose and Paolo at Paolo Alves NBA. If you'd also be kind enough to follow the show at the Logger Line, or even if you aren't on Twitter, if you just type in twitter.com/the Logger Line and go to the link tree that's in our bio, that's where you can get to all of our friends, partners, and sponsors. Sports Talk 790, Carbach Brewing, USA Today's Rockets, where you can access all of their content simply by going to the link tree. And you can also find all of our distributors, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you want to listen to the podcast. If you've not subscribed already, please do. Leave us a positive rating. If you could support the program with our friends, partners, and even the distributors, we would certainly appreciate any help you can give us. We greatly appreciate, and hopefully we can continue to grow this show along with the Rockets as they're growing as a basketball team. All right, with the plugs done, we'll adjourn. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.